poor rancher married the obese stranger, only for the ranch, but she shocked him like he'd never been. The sun was sinking low over the dry plains, painting the skies in hues of orange and crimson as the poor rancher, Caleb Dawson, stood at the edge of his dusty land with a heavy heart and heavier burdens on his shoulders. His cattle were thinning. The barn roof sagged like a tired old mule, and the bank letters were piling up like vultures circling for their feast. Caleb had worked his land for years. Calloused hands blistered, back bent, sweat stinging his eyes. But no matter how hard he fought, life always seemed to strike him harder. Then came the talk, whispers in town, gossip at the saloon, that a wealthy widow, large in size but larger in wealth, was looking for a husband. Her late father's ranch sprawled across fertile acres, a dream for any struggling cowboy. But she was not what most men desired. Her body was wide, her steps heavy, her presence often mocked by cruel tongues, who judged her by her shape and never her heart. Men turned their eyes away from her, chasing slender beauties with polished looks and hollow souls, while Martha, the so-called obese stranger, lived quietly, waiting for someone who could see her beyond the surface. Caleb, with desperation weighing him down, did not seek her heart. He sought her land, her cattle, her inheritance, and her fortune that could save his dying ranch. With a reluctant soul and a hardened face, he rode to her door one evening, tipped his hat and asked her hand. She looked at him with cautious eyes, eyes that had seen rejection more times than the seasons had changed. But something in his voice, in his quiet despair, touched her. Against her doubts, she said yes. The town buzzed with ridicule. The poor fool only wants her ranch, some sneered. He'll never love her, not a woman like that. The wedding was small, whispers louder than vows, yet Martha stood tall, her dress straining but her dignity unshaken, while Caleb kept his gaze steady, thinking of barns rebuilt and debts erased. He thought he was marrying a key to survival, nothing more. But the nights that followed unraveled truths he never expected. Martha was not just a woman of size. She was a woman of substance, wisdom, and strength. She rose before dawn, worked alongside him in the fields, her laughter echoing through the barns as she brushed the horses with tenderness. She cooked meals hearty enough to give him strength, but more than that, she filled the cold silence of his home with warmth and care. When storms rolled in, it was Martha who held the lantern high, guiding him through the dark. When wolves threatened the herd, it was Martha's sharp aim with a rifle that drove them back. She knew the land better than Caleb ever did, knew where water ran deep beneath the soil, knew how to read the skies, how to mend a fence with her own two hands. Every day Caleb watched her, and with every passing sunrise, the walls around his heart began to crack. She sang while she worked, not ashamed of her voice or her body, and the ranch came alive in a way it hadn't for years. Caleb, who thought himself strong, realized he had leaned all his life only on muscle and grit, while Martha leaned on wisdom, courage, and heart. One night, as the fire flickered in the hearth, Caleb found himself staring at her, not at the size of her body, but at the light in her eyes. He remembered how the world had laughed at her, dismissed her, and mocked their marriage. Yet here she was, proving stronger and braver than any he had ever known. He reached for her hand, rough and calloused from work, and for the first time he squeezed it not out of duty but out of gratitude, out of something stirring deep within him. Martha looked at him, and in her gaze he saw forgiveness, understanding, and something even more shocking, love. True love, patient and quiet, had been waiting all along. That night he whispered an apology, confessing that at first he had only sought her ranch. He braced for her anger, for her rejection. Instead, she smiled sadly and said, "I always knew. But I also knew you were a good man, just lost. And sometimes, even love needs a chance to grow, where it's least expected." Those words struck him, deeper than any wound. From then on, Caleb was not the same man. He worked harder, not for survival alone, but for the woman who had shown him what strength truly meant. He defended her against townsfolk's cruelty, his voice sharp as steel. "This woman saved me, saved this ranch, and she's worth more than all your empty words." Soon, those who once mocked fell silent as they saw the ranch bloom, the cattle thrive, and the love between them blossom like wildflowers after rain. Years later, Caleb would sit on the porch beside Martha, watching their children play, and he'd whisper to her, "I thought I married you for land, but it was your heart that gave me life." And she would laugh, her eyes shining, because she had always known. True love had shocked him, reshaped him, and gave him more than land. It gave him a family, a partner, and a purpose. And so, dear listeners, remember this. The world may judge by appearances, may sneer and mock, but real worth lies not in the size of a body, but in the size of a heart. And sometimes the greatest blessings come in the most unexpected forms. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more stories of love, courage, and hope are waiting. Stories that remind us that miracles don't always come dressed as we imagine. Sometimes they come as a stranger, shocking us with love we never thought we deserved. Months had passed since Caleb Dawson first married Martha, and while the ranch had slowly begun to breathe new life under their shared efforts, the real change was not in the land, but in the man himself. Caleb had always been hardened, closed off, a man who believed survival came only through grit and calloused hands. But each day, with Martha, was chiseling away at the stone around his heart. The whispers in town did not stop, though they lingered like flies on a hot summer day. Every time Caleb rode into town with Martha by his side, people's eyes would drift to her frame, and cruel laughter often followed them out of earshot. Caleb, once numb to it, began to feel fire burn in his chest. One afternoon at the mercantile, a slick-tongued man chuckled to his friend. "There goes Dawson with his prize cow. He sure bought himself a pasture with that one." Caleb's fists clenched. Once upon a time he might have ignored it, because back then he had thought the same thing in his weakness. But now those words cut deeper than knives, because he knew Martha's worth, and he wasn't about to let another man disgrace her. He turned, eyes blazing, and with a voice that silenced the whole store, he growled, "That woman has worked harder and braver than any man in this room, including me. You mock her, then you mock me. And I don't take kindly to cowards who use their tongues like weapons." The man stammered, flushed red, and backed down, while Martha's hand slipped into Caleb's. "Warm and steady," she whispered later as they rode home. "You don't have to defend me." "Caleb, I've lived with their words all my life." But Caleb shook his head fiercely. "No, Martha. I'll defend you as long as I have breath, because you deserve more than silence. You deserve a man who stands proud beside you." Those words made Martha's eyes glisten, and that night, when Caleb kissed her forehead before sleep, it wasn't out of duty, it was out of love. Yet life on the ranch was not all tender moments. A drought rolled in that summer, fiercer than the land had seen in years. The grass browned, the creeks shriveled, and cattle lowed with hunger. Many ranchers packed up and left, but Caleb and Martha refused to abandon what they had built together. Martha rose before the sun, hauling water, rationing feed, and keeping spirits alive when despair threatened to crush them. One night, Caleb found her outside, praying softly under the stars, her knees pressed into the dust. He stood silently, watching the woman the world mocked, begging heaven for rain not for herself, but for the animals, for the land, and even for the very neighbors who had scorned her. Caleb's throat tightened. He knelt beside her, his large, rough hand covering hers, and for the first time in his life he prayed too. That week rain came, heavy, cleansing, soaking the thirsty soil until rivers swelled again. Some said it was coincidence. Caleb believed it was faith, Martha's faith, strong enough to move the heavens. From then on he looked at her not just as a wife, but as a blessing sent to save him. One evening after the rain revived their fields, Caleb surprised Martha by taking her hand and leading her to the barn. Inside, the lantern flickered, and a simple table stood set with wildflowers and a freshly baked pie. Martha's brows knit in confusion. "What's all this?" she asked softly. Caleb cleared his throat, nervous like a boy. This is me telling you thank you for saving my land, for saving me. I married you for the wrong reasons, Martha, but I stay because of the right ones." Tears brimmed in Martha's eyes as she lowered herself onto the chair, her heart swelling with a joy she had never known. That night they spoke for hours, not about work or debts, but about dreams, about the children they wished to raise, about the kind of love they wanted to show them, a love not built on appearances, but on loyalty, resilience, and truth. Seasons passed, and Martha gave Caleb not just her wisdom, not just her strength, but also a family. When their first child was born, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin, Caleb held her in his arms and whispered, "You'll never know the hunger I knew. You'll never know the loneliness, because your mama gave me everything I never had." and he looked at Martha with awe, realizing the woman the world had dismissed had given him the greatest gift of all, legacy. Years later, townsfolk no longer mocked. They envied. They saw the Dawson Ranch thrive, saw the laughter that spilled from the house, saw the man once bitter now smiling, with pride as he walked hand in hand with the wife he once married for land. Some asked him in hushed tones, "Caleb, how did you find happiness in such an unlikely place?" Caleb would smile, tip his hat, and say, "Because I stopped looking at the surface and started seeing the soul. And what I found shocked me. It made me a better man." So, dear friends, if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Love is not measured by appearance, nor by wealth, nor by the shallow opinions of a watching world. True love is built in sweat and storms, in laughter and tears, in standing together when the world sneers. Caleb thought he was marrying a ranch, but what he married was a heart of gold that reshaped his life forever. And if this story touched you, don't forget, subscribe to the channel, because every week we bring you tales that remind us of what truly matters. Faith, hope, courage, and love in its purest form.